If I could just say it in our language, it makes a lot more sense. But because of the situation we're in, it's quite a challenge to articulate that kind of paradigm. I always think of Leroy when he talks about the flux, that our worldview is a constant flux, and every once in a while we get bits of it. What we try and say is if anybody says that our ways are primitive, they don't know what the heck they're talking about.
Yeah.
In other words, they don't know.
Mm-hmm.
How can you know something that you don't even speak the language? So our work now is to try and articulate that as best as we could into this language. And you saw some of, but not just that, but also bringing those Blackfoot words as part of our learning paradigm.
I guess one thing you could say is that life is about relationships.
Yeah.
And about developing and feeding those relationships. And so when it comes to things like time, in the Western sense, there's a removal of people from what I would consider real time. Maybe we shouldn't even call it time because that's too static of a thing. I like to think of it more as like a timeliness. But in the Western, there is that static, and so you can see even like in the Gregorian calendar and such, it's a lunar system, an indigenous lunar system that's been made static in 12 months. And you know, the day is this abstract. It's a circle divided in 12 pieces, and it doesn't represent reality. So I think more in terms of timeliness, from more Blackfoot perspective, is responding to the relationships that we have, appropriate to when things are happening. So when the sun comes up, then you get up and you greet the sun. When the sun goes down, then you speak to the sun. And you're going into nighttime. We don't have there's, in the Western system, you have this agenda that you impose upon reality rather than responding to what's happening in the world. And through that practice of imposing, you get further and further detached from that reality.
Yeah.
One way of getting an idea of what Blackfoot knowledge is contained into the observations that we've come to share. And one of them is, why do you need an economy that is very destructive? And from that you can discern what is it that we're saying? Why do you have to destroy species? You know, and it's those species, whatever they are, that give us life. And there's such a disconnect to commerce that doesn't think twice about clear-cutting a mountainside, or digging up coal, or fracking. So when we bring those forward, what we're really saying is, if you think it through, this is a Blackfoot knowledge base that is asking you, do you know what you're doing?
And tonight you're talking about Maslow too, and the influence that the Blackfeet have had on Maslow, which is huge because Maslow has had a tremendous impact on Western thought. He's one of the most respected psychologists of his time, and we continue to study him and try to understand people better through him. And so I'm wondering, could this be the beginning of maybe reclamation of Blackfoot beliefs, like as more than just primitive thought, as more than just, oh, that's what they think? Could it be the beginning of more of a marriage between perhaps the two perspectives today, and perhaps a step in a more conscious considerate society,
First of all, when we use the word primitive, what is more primitive than, that question? When is enough
Yeah. Yeah.
enough?
Yeah.
If that isn't primitive, I don't know what is.
Mhm.
But that's what was used,
Mhm.
to describe us.
Yeah.
Maslow has had an impact, and certainly I wish it was more of an impact.
Yeah.
I don't think we'd be having these discussions today
Mhm.
if it was more widespread
Yeah.
than what he did. And it's not so much that we have to, and I guess sometimes I get facetious, let me just put it this way. Who has the learning disability here?
Mhm.
You have to ask that question. That you haven't learned to live in the land yet, and here are the consequences. So when we bring this forward, we're trying to bring Blackfoot knowledge forward.
Gotcha.
You get what I mean?
Mhm.
It's like we know more about Western thought than Western people know about the Blackfoot.
Yeah, definitely. So what did Maslow learn from the Blackfoot?
Abraham Maslow came out to Siksika in 1938 as a hard scientist, a psychological researcher, and his work prior to coming out had led him to propose a universal among primates, which is that all primates, including humans, create social hierarchies that are put in place and kept in place by relationships of dominance and submission,
Mhm.
competition. The anthropologist Ruth Benedict, who was near Maslow at the time, he was working in New York, was proposing that other societies may have tools for helping Western society with some of its social ills. And one of the social ills that she talked about was the strong competition
Yeah.
that occurs in Western society. Maslow came to her and said, we can't do anything about that because this is something that happens with primates. I've seen it in my studies with primates, and I've conducted surveys with different human populations that show the same thing. And she told him, well, you've never stepped out of your culture, though. So he was sent by Ruth Benedict to Siksika as a cross-cultural experience that she hoped would change him. She'd already seen the answer herself in other indigenous communities. And when Maslow came to Siksika, he tried to carry out his usual study, which involved getting people to talk bad about each other as a way of rating their ego security.
Mhm.
And people were completely unwilling to do that, stonewalled him, but he saw that 90% of the community had really secure ego positions. They were very confident people, felt good about themselves, but absolutely refused to put other people down to get there. And it blew his mind because everything that he had learned up to that point told him that this can't happen. And so he reeled in that. One of a woman who comes to watch our presentation, who was friends with Maslow, said he talked about this to her one time, and he said the experience shook him to his knees.
Mm.
So having encountered this world where the impossible was happening, as far as he was concerned, then he had to struggle to figure out why.
Yeah.
And he spent the rest of his career trying to figure out why. And we talk about in our presentation some of the things that he believed were contributing factors to that. But out of his experience there, the impact that was made on him and his thinking that developed out of that, I mean, he he was no longer a hard scientist. He said, I'm not going to follow that methodology anymore. I'm going to learn intuitively from now on. He started that September after the summer he worked at Siksika. He started the first normative human psychology course because he thought he'd got a glimpse at something that was fully human. It made a huge impact. Everything that he did after that
Yeah.
had that impetus from his experience there. So his model of the hierarchy of needs, his idea of what self-actualization is, his notions of how to create organizational synergy, everything that went into the theories that have completely changed North American education, North American parenting, North American business,
Mm-hmm.
were influences from Maslow stumbling into a world that he was not expecting to be shocked by in the way that he was. It
Yeah.
changed him fundamentally.
When he first taught that course on normative psychology, up till that point, the discipline of psychology was really preoccupied with deviance.
Mm.
So, deviance compared to what?
Yeah.
You know, what you'd have to have, you know, a definition of what it is to be normal. And if you were not normal, then you're maybe deviant. But they just jumped into it.
Yeah.
And then it's amazing that the first course on normative psychology was taught by Maslow.
Yeah. Definitely. It is interesting. Mm. So let's see. I think it's interesting that it's not really mentioned that he was influenced by this culture, this Blackfoot Confederacy. Is this really the first time it's being brought up, or has it been?
It's there. How we got into conducting the research to draw out the story was because in the Ghana community where we're from, there was this shadow, now we've drawn it out, but there was this shadow of the story constantly that was Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs is an interpretation of teepee designs.
Mm.
And it's an interpretation that he got wrong. But we wanted to follow up on that story, and in actuality, the story is there. It's just that nobody's paid attention to it.
Yeah.
In Maslow's writing, he uses Blackfoot examples. In his biography, his most famous biography by John Honigman, it goes through his whole life from childhood to the end. When it comes to that summer, the chapter is called Follies with the Blackfoot. And you see this sequence of things happening all through his life at the beginning of the book, creating the scientist that he was and the ideas that he had. And then you come to this chapter, and some of the material that we use in our presentations to talk about his experience there, you can read it in that chapter. But not even his biographer got it, that something happened here. Just by the title of the chapter, it's like this was a blow-off time for Maslow. He went out and had some follies with the Indians. He comes back, and the next chapter is a completely changed man, and that's when when he really takes off on the strain of thought that would lead him into his very famous theories and his influences on American society. But yeah, it's there, but we had to see it from a Blackfoot reader's perspective.
Yeah.
As soon as we run into it, the story's obvious.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have to dig too far to find it. It's right there.
Yeah.
historians of psychology have missed it all these years, even though it's right there in front of them.
That's what Dr. Trimble really talks about. He said, I talked to the old guard at a psychology conference, and if anybody was going to take issue with what we've done, that was the time. He said, here is a guy, and I think he said a Watsonian.
Yeah, Watsonian psychologist.
Yeah, by the books. And it's so stark, the change in him. What happened? And he says, I know what happened. I've got the story. And he takes out our presentation and goes through it. He said, my concern is scholars don't use critical thinking. If anybody had any wits about what happened here, they would have said, okay, what happened? You know, in a very short period of time, he changed.
Yeah.
Why was it missed? You know, and until now, we're bringing this up and people are saying, oh.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say the scholars don't have critical thinking, because that's something that's so, it's very adamant that you develop critical thinking skills in academia. It's like all of your advanced classes are be specific, think critically about this. So
you still have the cultural blinders.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
Why the story can be out in front of you the whole time and you completely miss it because of the cultural blinders. One aspect of that blindness is that it is completely taboo to say that you had been fundamentally changed by your affiliation with the primitive people. Really.
Yeah.
As part of our research, Maslow was one case study, but we wanted to follow a number of influences, Blackfoot influences on Western society. And as part of that study, we began calling in and interviewing the people that are still visiting the communities today, the Western scholars that are coming to do research. And we asked them to talk to us about how their work with the elders has contributed to their profession, and they can talk at length about the work and how that's gone.
Yeah.
But then if we turn the question and ask them, okay, why did you come here out of all the places in the world to go? What was it that drew you here? And how has your work with the elders influenced your life personally? The vast majority of them can't talk about it. It's there, and they're choking and almost crying because it's so still completely embedded taboo to admit that you're not a detached observer, that you've got something that you're pursuing personally that drew you there other than just your science.
Yeah.
And that your experiences there are changing you and maybe affecting your work as a result, right? Maybe affecting it in a personal ways rather than by the scientific method. It's so completely taboo, and that's why Maslow never really talked about it. It's taboo, and it's taboo. It's so ingrained that that it's unconscious taboo, which is why the story can sit in front of somebody's face for 5 decades, and all these people trained to be critical thinkers don't even see it.
And people can get angry about it when people bring this forward. I've used the work that this one archaeologist did about finding out what really happened. I mean, the Indians knew, the Sioux, the Cheyenne knew, the Bloods knew, because those stories came of what happened at Little Bighorn.
Yeah.
We knew, but there was a whole movement to glorify Custer and make him into something he wasn't.
Yeah.
He ran. The 7th Cavalry didn't fight. But you're not supposed to say that. When an academic publishes something like that, he gets death threats.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's a cost that comes to admitting this kind of knowledge.
Definitely.
And why does it have to be that way? You know?
Well, even in most of the social sciences, if you're working with indigenous communities and you get too close, they say he's gone native. It's messed up. You know, the work is no longer can be considered credible, really.
Yeah, which is very lame. It's like, oh, that's old, you know, like this is the new way of thought, but it's old for a reason, you know, it's been around for a long time for a reason.
Still there.
You
It's
know.
still there. We had, somebody came in, Shirk hired a consultant to come in and evaluate our work. And I wasn't being mean, but I asked her, are you qualified to evaluate the work we do? And she kind of, you know, that was a question she did not expect. Are you capable? And if you are you brave enough to report on what we're really telling you?
Yeah.
She ventured a little that way in the final report, but in the end, it meant her job, if she's going to do more consultant work, she better not venture too far.
Wow.
And it's sad, you know.
Yeah. Do you feel it's getting better at all?
In some cases, I mean, we work with scholars that really go out on a limb and take those chances. I mean, Dr. Chambers we work with, her and her colleagues wrote about autobiographical writing. They did a wonderful job, but it's frowned upon. And they said, the heck with that. You know, if you don't like it, then don't buy our books. It is really well written. And all it is let's humanize scholarly work. It doesn't hurt anybody.
Yeah.
If it's the other way, it hurts a lot of people.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Part of what I think we need to remain aware of is that science, scholarship, academia, education are industries. They're money-making industries. And so in that sense, it's not surprising that there is a strong taboo. Because part of what we're trying to present with the Maslow story is also that he missed something really fundamental, because when he's trying to understand why this self-actualization and this synergy within the society was occurring at Siksika, he looked at child rearing, he looked at religion, he looked at ways of altruism going on in the society and such. He missed something that's really fundamental, which is the connection to place.
Yeah.
And the relationship between people that have lived in one place as a community for time immemorial, and what that does to your social psychology. He missed that. Part of what we're showing with the Maslow study is that there are contributions that can be made if we looked at if it was carried forward by somebody native to the community, and from that knowledge paradigm, you're going to get something even more important than what Maslow brought out. What Maslow brought out was, you know, he observed what was happening, and he fumbled for the rest of his life to try to understand how to make it happen for Western society. And it didn't work because he missed place. But since we're dealing with an industry, the notion of saying that they have the answers and they're the only ones that can really bring them out, that's taboo, because then it would mean resources have to go to those communities.
It will affect the bottom line. When you dehumanize people in, let's say, a place like this, the danger of that, and that's what we try and point out, if you dehumanize, what you're doing is you're dehumanizing yourself.
Yeah.
Ultimately. And we're saying, no, you don't have to. It's okay to be human. It's okay to get involved, you know. And therefore, that is where the relationship has a disconnect. It wasn't always like this. But it's, again, we go back to the buffalo and what we started out with the smoke. That's where that thinking started. You know, that we can justify killing all these animals.
Yeah.
But we don't want to think about the long-term consequences. No thought was given to that. And yet today that action is playing out.
Oh yeah.
Big time. But scientists are not going to go there. We're trying to steer them in that direction. And again, you know, when it's so important to stress, scientists, when they conclude their research, and if they do it in a way that has credibility, their conclusions when it comes to the land is not going to be any different than what we already know. It's just that it's so damn frustrating that they have to take too long to get there. Scientists are only beginning to understand knowledge that was already there.
It's really frustrating. So much damage has been done in the meantime. You know? So I know you both are very tired, so we can wrap this up. But I am wondering, I mean, there are definitely a lot of messages coming from what you're saying, but is there something you're hoping people can take from your presentations and what you're teaching and writing about?
Knowledge is a very spiritual pursuit.
Mm-hmm.
Don't let these things we've talked about get in the way of knowledge. It's very fulfilling, it's very satisfying. And don't be afraid of knowledge.
Yeah. Right. Well, thank you both so much. It was really a pleasure talking to you both. And,